The rain hammered against the windshield of Jack Sullivan's black Mustang as he sat in the parking lot of the Moonlight Diner, reading the contract for the 5th time. The paper was expensive, the kind rich people used for documents they never wanted questioned. The letterhead bore no company name, just an embossed seal that looked like it belonged in a lawyer's office or a government building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Target: Elizabeth Harper location, 1247 Birch Grove Road, Pine Valley. Timeline: 72 hours payment, $150,000. Upon confirmation, special instructions: make it look like an accident. Jack folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. 15 years in this business, and he'd never asked why. Questions were for people who couldn't sleep at night. Jack slept just fine. Thank you very much. The money always cleared, the targets always disappeared, and Jack Sullivan always drove away clean. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the woman's name, Elizabeth Harper. It sounded too normal, too much like someone who baked cookies for school fundraisers or volunteered at animal shelters. Most of his targets had names that sounded dangerous: Dmitry Volkov, Carlos Mendoza, Vincent, the Fish, Torino. Elizabeth Harper sounded like someone's mother. Jack started the engine and pulled out onto Highway 9, heading north toward Pine Valley. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks lost in storm clouds that had been gathering for 3 days. According to his GPS, Pine Valley was 2 hours away, a small town nestled in the foothills where everyone knew everyone else's business. Not ideal for his line of work, but Jack had learned to adapt to any environment. The radio crackled with weather warnings about flash flooding and power outages. Perfect cover, Jack thought. Natural disasters made excellent explanations for accidents. A tree falling during a storm, a mudslide. Carbon monoxide from a faulty generator during a power outage. The possibilities were endless. He'd received the contract 3 days ago, delivered to his apartment mailbox in the usual way: no return address, no postmark, just an envelope with his name written in precise block letters. Inside had been the contract, a cashier's check for $50,000 as a down payment, and a single photograph. Elizabeth Harper looked to be in her early 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair and tired eyes. She was standing in what appeared to be a garden, holding a watering can and smiling at whoever was taking the picture. She wore a simple sundress and no jewelry except for a thin gold wedding band. Nothing about her screamed high-value target, or threat to national security, or any of the usual reasons people hired Jack Sullivan. But Jack had learned long ago not to waste time wondering about motives. His job was simple: eliminate the target, collect the payment, move on to the next contract. Why was someone else's concern? Pine Valley announced itself with a faded wooden sign: population 2,847, home of the Fighting Eagles. The town looked exactly like Jack had imagined: a main street lined with mom-and-pop businesses, a diner that probably served the same menu since 1952, and houses that had seen better decades. The kind of place where pickup trucks outnumbered sedans and everyone waved at strangers out of habit. Jack drove through the center of town, memorizing the layout. One main drag, 3 cross streets, a volunteer fire department, and a sheriff's office that looked like it dealt mostly with drunk drivers and domestic disputes. The nearest hospital was probably 50 miles away in the county seat. Again, perfect for his purposes. 1247 Birch Grove Road sat at the end of a gravel lane, surrounded by oak trees and overgrown rosebush. The house was a 2-story Victorian that had once been painted white, but now showed patches of gray where the weather had won its long battle against maintenance. A wraparound porch sagged slightly on the left side, and several shutters hung at odd angles. The whole place had the look of a family slowly losing ground to time and circumstance, Jack parked his car behind a cluster of pine trees about a quarter-mile away and pulled out his binoculars. Through the lenses, he could see lights in several windows, shadows moving behind curtains. A red Honda Civic sat in the driveway next to a rusted Ford pickup truck that looked like it hadn't run in months. Smoke rose from the chimney, and he could make out the blue glow of a television in what was probably the living room. He settled in to watch and wait. Patience was half the job. You learned the target's routine, identified the best opportunity, planned your approach, and then executed with precision. Jack had been doing this long enough that he could predict most people's daily patterns within 48 hours of observation. But as the hours passed, something felt off about the Harper house. There was movement inside. He could see figures passing by windows, but no one came or went. No trips to the grocery store, no school runs, no visits from neighbors. The red Honda never moved from its spot in the driveway. It was like the house had turned inward on itself, becoming a fortress against the outside world. Around midnight, Jack saw something that made him adjust his binoculars for a clearer view. A figure in white, a woman, based on the silhouette, appeared at an upstairs window. She stood there for several minutes, perfectly still, before slowly raising one hand to press against the glass. Even at this distance, there was something haunting about the gesture. It looked like goodbye. Jack lowered the binoculars and checked his watch. He'd been watching for 6 hours, and his initial assessment was complete. Single-family residence, minimal security, isolated location. The storm would provide excellent cover for his approach. He could be inside and finished within 30 minutes, then be back on Highway 9 before anyone in Pine Valley even knew Elizabeth Harper was dead. He reached for his gear bag, then hesitated. Something was nagging at him, a professional instinct he'd learned to trust over the years. In his experience, people who were marked for death fell into predictable categories. They were criminals trying to escape their past. They were witnesses who'd seen too much. They were spouses who'd discovered the wrong bank account or love letter. They were business partners who'd outlived their usefulness. But Elizabeth Harper didn't fit any of those profiles. The house, the car, the isolated routine, it all suggested someone who was already hiding from the world. You didn't hire Jack Sullivan to eliminate someone who'd already eliminated themselves from public life. Unless the client wasn't paying him to kill Elizabeth Harper. Unless they were paying him to kill what Elizabeth Harper represented. A symbol, a message, a loose end that needed cutting before it could unravel something larger. Jack had taken contracts like that before. The pharmaceutical executive who discovered his company was falsifying test results. The accountant who'd stumbled across evidence of embezzlement. The journalist who'd gotten too close to a story that powerful people wanted buried. In those cases, the target's guilt or innocence was irrelevant. They'd simply become inconvenient. The storm was getting worse. Lightning illuminated the valley in stark, brief moments, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. Jack pulled on his rain gear and checked his equipment. A Glock 19 with a suppressor, a tactical knife, lockpicks, disposable latex gloves, a small bottle of liquid that would simulate the effects of a heart attack if administered correctly. He preferred the chemical approach when possible, cleaner, less violent, easier to explain to medical examiners who weren't looking too closely. A middle-aged woman living alone in an isolated house, dealing with the stress of whatever had driven her into hiding. A heart attack would surprise exactly no one. Jack made his way through the trees toward the house, moving slowly to avoid making noise. The rain masked his footsteps, and the wind covered any sounds of branches breaking under his weight. As he got closer, he could hear something unexpected. Voices. Multiple voices, all female, coming from inside the house. He crept closer to the wraparound porch and positioned himself beneath a window where the voices were clearest. What he heard made him pause. "Mom, you need to take the medicine," the doctor said. "I can't keep it down, Sarah. I've tried." "Then we'll try again in an hour. Small sips, remember." "Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson." "With what money, Emma?" "You know we can't afford another house call," Jack frowned. This wasn't the conversation he'd expected to overhear. It sounded like Elizabeth Harper was sick. Very sick, based on the tone of concern in the other voices. He counted at least 3. Different speakers, all younger than the target. Daughters, most likely. He moved to another window and peered carefully through a gap in the curtains. What he saw stopped him cold. Elizabeth Harper was lying on a couch in what had once been a formal living room, covered with a patchwork quilt that had seen better years. She was thin, not fashionably thin, but sick thin. Her skin had a grayish pallor that Jack recognized from too many crime scenes. This wasn't a woman hiding from enemies. This was a woman dying. Around her sat 4 girls, ranging in age from maybe 8 to 16. The oldest, a blonde teenager, was holding a glass of water and trying to coax her mother to drink. The youngest, a dark-haired child who couldn't have been more than 8, was curled up in a chair nearby, clutching a stuffed rabbit and watching her mother with eyes that were too old for her face. Felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd been hired to kill a dying woman. Someone was paying him $150,000 to murder a mother who probably wouldn't live another month anyway. The only question was why. He backed away from the window and returned to his position in the trees. 4. The first time in 15 years, Jack Sullivan wasn't sure he could complete a contract. Not because Elizabeth Harper was innocent. Innocence was a luxury he couldn't afford to consider. But because killing her wouldn't accomplish whatever the client really wanted. Those 4 girls would be orphaned. They'd be alone in a house they probably couldn't afford, in a town where everyone would know their business, with no family to take them in, unless unless that was exactly what the client wanted. Jack pulled out his phone and stared at the number he'd been given for confirmation of completion. For the first time in his career, he considered calling it to ask questions. Who wanted Elizabeth Harper dead? Why? What happened to the girls after she was gone? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But asking questions was a dangerous game in his line of work. Clients who hired people like Jack Sullivan didn't appreciate curiosity. They paid for results, not conversation. And Jack had built his reputation on being the kind of contractor who delivered results without complications. He put the phone away and settled back to continue his surveillance. The smart play was to wait until the target was alone, complete. The contract is specified, and collect his payment. What happened to 4 orphaned girls in Pine Valley, Montana, was not his problem. But as Jack sat in the rain, watching shadows move behind the curtains of the Harper house, he couldn't shake the feeling that this contract was different. That someone was using him as a weapon in a war he didn't understand, against an enemy who was already losing. And for the first time in 15 years, that bothered him. The storm raged on, and Jack Sullivan sat in the darkness, wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his professional life, or if he'd already made it by taking this contract in the first place. Dawn broke gray and subdued over Pine Valley, the storm having exhausted itself sometime before sunrise. Jack Sullivan had spent the night in his car, dozing fitfully between periods of observation. His body ached from the cramped position, but his mind was sharp. 15 years of irregular sleep schedules had taught him to function on whatever rest he could grab. The Harper house looked different in daylight. What had seemed mysterious and fortress-like in the darkness now appeared simply worn down. Paint peeled from the window frames, gutters sagged under the weight of accumulated debris, and the front step showed patches where the wood had rotted through. This wasn't a house hiding secrets. It was a house where hope had been slowly leaking away. At 7:30, The front door opened for the first time since Jack had begun his surveillance. The oldest girl emerged, wearing a heavy coat that was too big for her frame and carrying what looked like a thermos and a small bag. She walked to the red Honda, spent several minutes coaxing it to start, then drove away down the gravel lane. Jack followed at a distance, curious about her destination. She drove straight to Pine Valley Elementary, where she parked and hurried inside. Through his binoculars, Jack watched her speaking with someone at the front desk. Animated conversation. Lots of hand gestures, the body language of someone making apologies or explanations. She emerged 20 minutes later, carrying 4 backpacks and what appeared to be a stack of papers. Homework assignments, Jack realized. She was collecting schoolwork for her sisters. The oldest girl, Sarah, he remembered from the conversation he'd overheard, was handling the education of 3 younger children while their mother lay dying in the living room. Jack found himself following her next stop, Pine Valley Market, a small grocery store that looked like it had been serving the community since the 1950s. Through the large front windows, he watched Sarah carefully count money before selecting items from the shelves. Her choices were methodical, generic brands. Bulk items, nothing that could be considered a luxury. She spent nearly 30 minutes comparison shopping for basic necessities. At the checkout, there was a problem. Jack couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see Sarah's shoulders tense as the cashier, heavy-set woman in her 60s, shook her head and pointed at the register total. Sarah pulled out more money, counted it twice, then put several items back. The cashier's expression softened, and Jack watched her discreetly slip some of the returned items back into Sarah's bags when the girl wasn't looking. The small kindness hit Jack unexpectedly. In his world, people were either targets, threats, or obstacles. The idea of someone helping a stranger's child, expecting nothing in return, felt foreign and somehow dangerous. It suggested a version of humanity that didn't exist in Jack's experience. Sarah's final stop was the Pine Valley Pharmacy, a narrow building squeezed between a hardware store and a beauty salon. This visit was the shortest but clearly the most stressful. Jack watched through the window as Sarah spoke with the pharmacist, a tall man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The conversation involved pointing at a prescription bottle, more money counting, and finally Sarah walking away. Empty-handed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Jack understood immediately. Elizabeth Harper needed medication that her family couldn't afford. In a town like Pine Valley, the pharmacist probably knew exactly what was happening in the Harper household, but business was business. Compassion didn't pay for rent or wholesale. Drug costs. The drive back to Birch Grove Road gave Jack time to process what he'd observed. Sarah Harper was 16 years old and functioning as the head of a household in crisis. She was managing 3 younger siblings, a dying mother, educational responsibilities, grocery shopping, and medical care. Most adults would have cracked under that pressure. This girl was handling it with a competence that spoke to months, maybe years, of practice. Jack pulled into his surveillance position and watched Sarah carry groceries into the house. Through his binoculars, he could see movement in the windows, the other girls helping to unload bags, animated conversation, what looked like attempts to make their mother comfortable. It was a family functioning under impossible circumstances, held together by determination and love. At noon, Jack made a decision that surprised him. Instead of continuing his surveillance from a distance, he walked up the gravel driveway and knocked on the front door. The response was immediate but cautious. Footsteps approached the door, paused, then a young voice called out, "Who is it?" "My name is Jack Sullivan," he said, using his real name for reasons he couldn't explain. "My car broke down about a mile up the road. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call for help." The lie came easily. Jack had used variations of it dozens of times to gain access to targets, but this time felt different. This time, he genuinely didn't know what he intended to do once he got inside. "Just a minute," the voice said. Jack heard whispered conversation, then footsteps moving away from the door. Several minutes passed before it opened, revealing Sarah Harper. Up close, she looked older than 16, not physically, but in her eyes. These were the eyes of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "You said your car broke down?" she asked, not opening the door fully. "About a mile north of here. The engine just died. No cell service up there." Jack gestured vaguely in the direction he'd claimed to come from. "I saw your house and thought maybe I could call a tow truck." Sarah studied him carefully. Jack realized she was assessing threat levels, just as he would in her position. Smart girl, cautious, she'd probably been dealing with strangers who might pose dangers to her family for longer than she should have had to. "We don't really have a phone," she said finally. "I mean, we have one, but it's not working right now." Jack understood. Phone service had been cut off, probably along with other utilities they couldn't afford. "Is there anyone else around here who might have a phone I could use?" "The Hendersons live about 2 miles that way," Sarah pointed down the road. "They're usually home." She started to close the door, then paused. "Are you okay walking that far? You look kind of tired." The question caught Jack off guard. When was the last time someone had asked if he was okay? When had anyone cared about his well-being without expecting something in return? "I'm fine," he said. "Thanks for your help." But as he turned to walk away, he heard voices from inside the house, young voices, distressed, calling for Sarah. She hesitated, clearly torn between closing the door on a stranger and responding to what sounded like an emergency. "Sarah!" The voice was urgent now. "She's getting worse." Sarah's facade of competent control cracked for just a moment. Jack saw fear flash across her face, not fear of him, but fear of losing the most important person in her world. "I have to go," she said, already turning away from the door. "Wait," Jack said, the word coming out before he could stop it. "Is someone sick?" Sarah turned back, and Jack could see her calculating whether this stranger might be someone who could help, or someone who would make things worse. "My mom," she said finally. She's really sick." "What kind of sick?" "Cancer." The word came out flat, matter of fact, the way children learn to say things that are too big for them to understand. "The doctor said there's nothing more they can do." From inside the house came the sound of someone crying, not the frustrated crying of a child denied something they wanted, but the heartbroken sobbing of someone who understood exactly what was happening. Jack found himself saying, "Can I help?" Sarah stared at him. "You're a stranger." Sometimes strangers are the only people who can help. It was a truth Jack had never spoken aloud before, but he realized it was accurate. Strangers had no investment in maintaining illusions or protecting feelings. Strangers could see situations clearly because they weren't emotionally involved. "Why would you want to help us?" Sarah asked. Jack didn't have a good answer for that question. Everything in his training, his experience, his professional instincts told him to walk away, to complete his contract as specified and collect his payment. Elizabeth Harper was going to die anyway. Cancer would accomplish what he'd been hired to do, just on a different timeline. But looking at Sarah's face, seeing the weight of responsibility she carried, remembering the way she'd carefully counted money for groceries and walked away from the pharmacy empty-handed, Jack realized something had shifted inside him. "Because you need help," he said simply. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Okay," she said, "but I need to warn you, it's not pretty in here." Jack followed her into the house and immediately understood what she meant. The smell hit him first, a combination of medication, unwashed bedding, and something else he recognized from crime scenes. The smell of a body beginning its surrender to death. The living room had been converted into a makeshift medical facility. Elizabeth Harper lay on a couch that had been pushed against the wall, surrounded by folding tables covered with pill bottles, water glasses, tissues, and what looked like medical equipment. The woman Jack had been hired to kill was barely conscious. Her breathing shallow and labored. Around her sat 3 girls. The youngest, maybe 8 years old, was curled up in a chair with a stuffed animal, watching her mother with eyes that were red from crying. A girl who looked about 10 was sitting on the floor next to the couch, holding her mother's hand and whispering something too quiet for Jack to hear. The third girl, probably 12 or 13, stood near the window with her arms crossed, trying to look tough but failing to hide her terror. "This is Emma, Rachel, and Lily," Sarah said, gesturing to each girl in turn. "Girls, this is Mr. Sullivan. His car broke down." They looked at him with the wariness of children who'd learned not to trust easily. Jack realized they were probably used to strangers who brought bad news, doctors with grim updates, social workers asking uncomfortable questions, debt collectors demanding payments the family couldn't make. "Hello," Jack said, feeling absurdly formal. What was the protocol for greeting children when you'd been hired to kill their mother? Elizabeth Harper stirred at the sound of his voice, her eyes opening to focus on him with effort. "Who?" "Mom, this is Mr. Sullivan," Sarah said, moving to kneel beside the couch. "He needed to use our phone." Elizabeth tried to sit up, then fell back against the pillows. "I'm sorry," she whispered. We're not in a position to help anyone right now." "That's okay," Jack said. "Actually, I was wondering if maybe I could help you." The silence that followed was profound. Jack could see the girls exchanging glances, trying to figure out what this stranger might want from their family. In their experience, people who offered help usually wanted something in return, something the Harper family couldn't afford to give. "We don't have any money," Emma said bluntly. She was the one standing by the window, the one trying to project strength. "If you're selling something or collecting for charity or whatever, we can't pay." "I'm not asking for money," Jack said. "Then what do you want?" This from Rachel, the middle child still holding her mother's hand. Jack looked around the room, at the medication they couldn't afford, at the children caring for a dying parent, at the weight of responsibility crushing a 16-year-old girl who should have been worried about prom dates and college applications. "I want to understand what's happening here," he said. It was the first completely honest thing Jack Sullivan had said in 15 years. The silence stretched between them like a bridge no one was sure they should cross. Jack stood in the doorway of what had once been a comfortable family living room, now transformed into a makeshift hospice, and felt the weight of 4 pairs of eyes studying him. These children had learned to read adults quickly, to identify who might help and who might hurt, who could be trusted and who would disappoint them. Elizabeth Harper's breathing was the only sound, a wet, labored rhythm that Jack recognized from too many deathbeds. She had days, maybe a week if she was lucky. The cancer had advanced far beyond anything medicine could fix, and her body was systematically shutting down. Jack had seen enough death to know when it was approaching, and it was practically sitting in the room with them. "What did you mean, you want to understand?" Sarah asked. Her voice carried the careful control of someone who'd learned not to show weakness to strangers. Jack found himself in unfamiliar territory. 15 years of assassination work had required him to become an expert liar, to create false personas and motivations at a moment's notice. But looking at these girls, really looking at them, he discovered he didn't want to lie anymore. "I mean, I'd like to know what happened to your family," he said. "How you ended up here, taking care of your mother by yourselves. Why?" Emma's question was sharp, suspicious. At 13, she was old enough to understand that strangers who asked personal questions usually had agendas. Because sometimes when you understand a situation, you can figure out how to help. Rachel, the 10-year-old still holding her mother's hand, spoke up. "Are you a social worker?" "Because we already talked to them. We're fine on our own." "I'm not." "A social worker? Police?" "No." "Then what are you?" This from Lily, the youngest, who had been silent until now. Her voice was small but determined, and she clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter as she spoke. Jack hesitated. What was he? A killer for hire didn't seem like an appropriate introduction to children, who were already dealing with more tragedy than most adults could handle. "I'm someone who fixes problems," he said finally. It wasn't entirely untrue. Elimination of targets could be considered problem-solving from a certain perspective. "Our mom isn't a problem," Emma said fiercely. "She's sick. That's different." "You're right," Jack said. "Your mom isn't the problem. But there might be other problems I could help with." Sarah was studying him with the intensity of someone who'd been forced to become an expert at reading people. "Like what kind of problems?" Jack looked around the room, taking inventory. The medication bottles were mostly empty. The grocery bags Sarah had brought in contained generic brands and bulk items, food that would stretch, not food that would nourish. The house itself showed signs of deferred maintenance that spoke to months or years of financial strain. "Money problems," he said. "Medicine problems. Practical problems. We don't take charity," Emma said quickly. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering help. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Rachel asked. Jack thought about that. "Charity is when someone gives you something because they feel sorry for you. Help is when someone works with you to solve a problem because it's the right thing to do." Elizabeth stirred on the couch, her eyes opening with obvious effort. "Girls," she whispered, "don't bother this man. He has his own problems." "Actually," Jack said, surprising himself, "I don't." "Not anymore." Elizabeth tried to focus on him, squinting as if trying to bring his face into clarity. "You look familiar. Do I? Do I know you?" Jack's heart stopped for a moment. Had she seen his face somewhere? Was it possible she knew why he was really here? But then he realized she was simply confused, her brain clouded by pain medication and the approach of death. People near the end often thought they recognized strangers. "No, ma'am, we've never met. He says he wants to help us," Sarah explained to her mother. "His car broke down." Elizabeth's eyes moved from Jack to her daughters, and he could see her mind working despite her physical weakness. She was trying to assess whether this stranger represented a threat or an opportunity. "What kind of help?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack realized he was at a crossroads. He could invent some plausible story about being a traveling salesman or insurance adjuster, offer minor assistance, and then disappear when the family wasn't looking. Complete his contract remotely. Elizabeth Harper would be dead within days anyway, and no one would question the death of a woman with terminal cancer. Or he could tell the truth. Not the whole truth that would terrify these children beyond recovery, but enough truth to build something real. "I have money," he said, "and I have time. And I know how to get things done when other people say they can't be done." "Why would you want to spend your money on strangers?" Sarah asked. It was a fair question, and Jack didn't have a good answer. In his world, money was a tool for buying services, information, weapons, silence, access. You didn't spend money on people unless you expected something in return. But looking at this family, Jack realized he didn't want anything from them. He wanted to give them something they needed. "Because you need help and I can provide it. But why do you care?" Emma pressed. "You don't know us." Jack studied Emma's face, suspicious, protective, already hardened by circumstances that should never touch children. She reminded him of himself at that age, after his own family had fallen apart and he'd learned that adults were unreliable and the world was fundamentally unfair. "Maybe that's exactly why I care," he said. The answer seemed to satisfy something in Emma's expression. She uncrossed her arms and moved closer to her mother's couch. "What kind of help are you talking about?" Sarah asked. Jack gestured toward the nearly empty medication bottles. "For starters, whatever medicine your mother needs that you can't afford. Her pain medication costs $400 a bottle," Rachel said. Insurance won't cover it because they say it's experimental. $400. Jack had spent more than that on a single dinner with clients. He'd lost more than that in poker games he'd played to pass time between contracts. For the Harper family, it represented an impossible sum. For Jack, it was. Pocket change. That's not a problem, he said. We can't pay you back, Sarah said quickly. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking for? Jack looked around the room again at Elizabeth Harper struggling to breathe, at 4 children trying to hold their world together through determination and love, at a situation that was simultaneously hopeless and precious. I'm asking if you'll let me stay, he said. The request surprised even him. Jack Sullivan didn't stay places. He completed jobs and moved on. He lived in anonymous hotel rooms and rental cars, maintaining no connections that could be traced or exploited. Staying meant vulnerability. Staying meant caring about outcomes he couldn't control. Stay where? Lily asked. Here, until ... Jack gestured vaguely toward Elizabeth. Until things are settled. You mean until Mom dies? Emma said bluntly. Yes. The honesty seemed to shock the girls. Adults had been dancing around that reality. For months, using euphemisms and false hope to avoid acknowledging what everyone could see. Jack's directness was jarring, but also somehow refreshing. Why would you want to do that? Sarah asked. Because you shouldn't have to go through this. Alone. Elizabeth made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Mr. Sullivan, she whispered, you don't understand what you're offering. This I send single quotes T. This isn't going to be easy to watch. I've seen death before, Jack said. It was true, though. He'd usually been the one causing it, rather than comforting those left behind. Not like this, not a mother dying while her children watch. Jack looked at each of the girls in turn. Sarah, carrying responsibilities that belonged to adults. Emma, building walls to protect herself from more heartbreak. Rachel, trying to hold onto hope while her world collapsed. Lily, too young to understand, but old enough to know something terrible was happening. Maybe that's exactly what I need to see, he said. Elizabeth studied his face for a long moment. You're running from something, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Something bad? Yes. Will it follow you here? Jack thought about the contract in his jacket pocket, about Vincent Torino and the people who paid for permanent solutions. To temporary problems. It might. Then you can't stay. Mom, Sarah started to protest. No, Elizabeth said, finding strength from somewhere to make her voice firm. I won't have my girls put in danger because of someone else's problems. Jack felt something crack inside his chest. This woman was dying, her family was falling apart, and she was still trying to protect her children from potential threats. She was still thinking like a mother even as her body shut down around her. What if I could guarantee that wouldn't happen? He asked, how? By making sure the people I'm running from never find me here. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. What kind of people are you running from, Mr. Sullivan? Jack realized he was at another crossroads. He could lie, create some story about debt or divorce or business problems gone wrong. Or he could tell this dying woman the truth and trust her to decide whether he belonged in her children's lives. Dangerous people, he said. People who solve problems by making other problems disappear. And you worked for these people? Yes. Doing what? Jack looked at the 4 girls, then back at Elizabeth. Things I'm not proud of. Elizabeth was quiet for a long time, her breathing the only sound in the room. Jack could see her weighing his words, trying to decide whether he represented salvation or additional catastrophe for her family. If you stay, she said finally, you're not just helping us, you're changing your entire life. Are you ready for that? Jack thought about the contract in his pocket. About 15 years of living without connections or consequences. About a life built on movement and isolation. and the careful cultivation of emotional numbness. "Yes," he said, and meant it. Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Then welcome to our family, Mr. Sullivan. God help us all." The first night Jack spent in the Harper house, he didn't sleep. Not because of the unfamiliar surroundings or the constant sounds of Elizabeth's labored breathing, but because he found himself listening to the rhythm of a family settling into rest. Sarah checks on her mother every hour. Emma tossing restlessly in the bed she shared with Rachel. Lily talking quietly to her stuffed rabbit in the pre-dawn darkness. Jack had claimed the small guest room upstairs, a space that had clearly been unused for months. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale, but it offered him a view of the front driveway and rode old habits from a profession where paranoia meant survival. He sat by the window most of the night, watching for headlights that never came, and thinking about the phone call he needed to make at sunrise. He drove into town and used a payphone outside the closed diner. The number he dialed belonged to Vincent Torino, the man who'd hired him for the Elizabeth Harper contract. "Sullivan." Vincent's voice was crisp, businesslike. "Status report." "Target acquired," Jack said, using the coded language they'd established years ago. "Complications discovered. Need 48-hour extension." There was a pause. Vincent Torino didn't like complications. What kind of complications? "Local. Law enforcement presence. Need to wait for the optimal window." Another pause. "You've never needed extensions before. This situation is unique. Target is under observation by multiple parties. Premature action would compromise operational security." It was all lies, but lies wrapped in the professional terminology that Vincent expected. Jack had learned that the key to managing handlers was giving them explanations that sounded official while revealing nothing meaningful. 48 hours, Vincent said finally. "No more extensions after that. Understood." Jack hung up and drove back to Birch Grove Road, his mind already working on longer-term solutions. 48 hours would become 72, then a week, then longer. Eventually, Vincent would send someone to investigate, but by then Jack planned to have the situation resolved in ways his former employer couldn't anticipate. When he returned to the house, he found the girls in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast with ingredients that had clearly been stretched past their limits. Sarah was trying to make pancakes with a mixture that was more water than batter. Emma was cutting bread so thin it was practically transparent. Rachel was attempting to brew coffee from grounds that had obviously been used before. "Good morning," Jack said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. 4 pairs of eyes turned to stare at him. The bag was full, not just full, but overflowing with fresh fruit. Real maple syrup, thick-cut bacon, eggs, coffee, orange juice, and bread from the bakery section rather than the discount rack. "We can't afford all this," Sarah said immediately. "I can," Jack replied, unpacking items onto the counter. "And I did." "We told you we don't take charity," Emma said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held the day before. She was staring at the bacon like she hadn't seen meat in weeks. "This isn't charity. This is breakfast. There's a difference." Lily approached the counter cautiously, reaching out to touch an orange like it was made of gold. "Can we really eat this? That's why I bought it." Jack had forgotten what it felt like to see genuine joy over something as simple as fresh food. Lily's face lit up as she held the orange to her nose, breathing in the citrus scent. Rachel actually clapped her hands when she saw the real maple syrup. Even Emma's carefully constructed walls cracked enough to allow a small smile. "How do you like your eggs?" Jack asked, rolling up his sleeves. "You're going to cook?" Sarah asked, surprised. Someone should. "And you look like you could use a break." It was true. Sarah had dark circles under her eyes and moved with the careful economy of someone who was constantly exhausted. At 16, she was functioning as mother, nurse, financial manager, and guardian to 3 younger children while watching her actual mother die. Jack had seen seasoned soldiers crack under less pressure. "I don't know how," Sarah admitted quietly. "How to what?" "Take a break. I don't remember how to not be responsible for everything." Jack paused in his unpacking and really looked at her. Sarah Harper had probably been carrying adult responsibilities since her mother's diagnosis, maybe longer. She'd been forced to become the adult in the family while still being a child herself. "Today you learn," he said. "Go sit with your mother. I'll handle breakfast. But what if what? What if I burn the eggs? What if the pancakes stick to the pan? What if breakfast isn't perfect?" Jack shrugged. "Then we'll eat imperfect. Food and no one will die from it." Sarah hesitated, clearly struggling with the concept of letting someone else take control. "Sarah," Jack said gently, "when was the last time you sat down for a meal without worrying about what needed to be done?" "Next?" She thought about it. "I don't remember. Then it's time." Cooking breakfast became an education in family dynamics. Rachel appointed herself as Jack's assistant, carefully explaining how each family member liked their eggs and warning him that Lily wouldn't eat anything that touched something that had been green. Emma maintained her suspicious distance, but couldn't resist offering corrections to his pancake flipping technique. From the living room came the sound of Sarah reading to her mother something light and cheerful that bore no resemblance to their current reality. "Mr. Sullivan?" Lily appeared at his elbow as he flipped bacon. "Are you going to stay forever?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know about forever, but I'll stay as long as you need me. What if we need you forever?" Jack looked down at her serious 8-year-old face and felt something shift in his chest. "Then I guess we'll figure that out when forever gets here." When breakfast was ready, they carried plates into the living room so Elizabeth could eat with them. She managed only a few bites, but Jack could see the effort she was making to participate in this moment of normalcy her daughters needed. "This is really good," Rachel announced, syrup dripping down her chin. "Better than good," Emma added, and Jack caught her looking at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. After breakfast, Jack excused himself and drove back into town. Pine Valley Pharmacy was busy for a Wednesday morning, but the same tall pharmacist with graying hair was behind the counter. Jack waited until the store was empty, then approached with Elizabeth's prescription bottle. "I need to fill this," he said, placing the bottle and $500 bills on the counter. The pharmacist's name tag read, "Dr. Morrison," looked at the money, then at Jack. "You're not family." "No, but I'm paying. This medication is very expensive. The Harper family's insurance doesn't cover it." "I'm not asking about insurance. I'm asking you to fill the prescription." Dr. Morrison studied Jack's face carefully. "Are you some kind of philanthropist, religious organization?" "I'm someone who has money and knows a family that needs medicine. It's not complicated. In my experience, strangers who pay for expensive medications usually want something in return." Jack met his gaze steadily. "I want Elizabeth Harper to be as comfortable as possible during the time she has left. And I want her daughters to know they did everything they could for their mother." Something in Jack's tone must have convinced the pharmacist, because Dr. Morrison nodded and took the prescription bottle. "This will take about 20 minutes. While he waited, Jack walked through Pine Valley's small downtown, seeing it with different eyes than he had during his initial surveillance. The hardware store sold practical items that people actually needed rather than luxury accessories. The diner's menu board advertised honest food at honest prices. The bank was small enough that the manager probably knew every customer by name. It was the kind of community Jack had never experienced, a place where people's lives intersected in meaningful ways, where neighbors noticed when someone was struggling and tried to help without being asked. It was the opposite of the anonymous urban environments where Jack had spent his adult life. When he returned to the pharmacy, Dr. Morrison had the medication ready along with detailed instructions for dosage and side effects. "This should last about 2 weeks," he said, handing Jack the bag. "When she needs more, just come back. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." Dr. Morrison paused. Those girls had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. It's good that someone's finally helping them carry it. Jack drove back to the house thinking about burden sharing. In his previous life, burdens were individual problems to be solved independently. You didn't share problems because that meant admitting weakness, and weakness was dangerous. But watching the Harper family, Jack was beginning to understand that some burdens were too heavy for one person to carry alone. The afternoon brought new challenges. Emma's school called to discuss her declining attendance. Rachel needed help with homework she'd missed while caring for her mother. Lily had a low-grade fever that might have been serious or might have been the stress of watching her mother die. Jack found himself becoming a problem solver in ways he'd never anticipated. He called Emma's school and arranged for independent study options. He sat with Rachel and worked through math problems that had nothing to do with the life and death calculation she'd been forced to master. He took Lily's temperature every hour and read her stories until her fever broke. Elizabeth watched all of this from her makeshift bed, and Jack could see her struggling with complex emotions. Relief that her daughters were being cared for. Gratitude for help she couldn't provide herself. Guilt that a stranger was doing what she wished she could do. And underneath it all, the grief of a mother who knew she was running out of time to prepare her children for a world without her. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Elizabeth asked Jack to sit with her. Her voice was weaker than it had been that morning, but her mind was clear. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Jack had been expecting this question. "I told you, I wanted to help. Men like you don't help families like ours without reasons." "What's your reason?" Jack looked at her carefully. Elizabeth Harper was dying, but she wasn't naive. She'd observed him closely enough to recognize that he wasn't what he appeared to be. "Maybe I needed to be here as much as you needed help," he said. "Running from dangerous people, you said." "Yes, the kind of dangerous people who might hurt my daughters." Jack thought about Vincent Torino, about the contracts and the money and the world he'd walked away from. "Not if I handle things correctly. And if you don't handle things correctly, then I'll make sure I'm the only one who pays the price." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "You're not who you pretended to be when you knocked on our door." "No, but you're becoming someone different by being here." Jack considered that. Was he becoming someone different? Or was he rediscovering someone he'd buried so deeply he'd forgotten that person ever existed? "Maybe," he said. "My girls are starting to care about you," Elizabeth said. "That makes you dangerous in a different way. I know. If you're going to break their hearts, do it now, before they get too attached." Jack looked toward the stairs where 4 children were sleeping, probably for the first time in months without worrying about what crisis might greet them in the morning. "I'm not going to break their hearts," he said. "Promise me. I promise." Elizabeth smiled, the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her. "Then welcome to the family, Mr. Sullivan, for real this time." Jack had been with the Harper family for 8 days when his phone rang at 3:17 a.m. He was instantly alert, old habits from a profession where late-night calls usually meant emergency relocations or immediate threats. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was familiar. "Time's up, Sullivan." Vincent Torino. Jack's blood went cold as he realized his former handler had somehow obtained a new phone and was calling from an untraceable number. "I need more time," Jack said quietly, moving away from the guest room window where he might be overheard. "No. You've had 10 days. The client is asking questions I can't answer much longer." Jack stepped into the hallway, closing his door softly. The house was quiet except for Elizabeth's oxygen concentrator humming from the living room below. "The situation is more complex than originally briefed." "Complex how?" Jack thought quickly. He needed to buy more time without revealing that he'd abandoned the contract entirely. Target has round-the-clock medical supervision. Multiple witnesses present at all times. Security situation has changed. What kind of security? Local law. Enforcement conducting welfare checks. Social services involvement. Attempting completion now would create unacceptable exposure. There was a long pause. Jack could almost hear Vincent's mind working, weighing the risks of a messy assassination against the client's demands for results. Sullivan, in 15 years. You've never requested multiple extensions. You've never cited security concerns. You've never failed to complete a contract. I've never had a contract with this many variables. Maybe the problem isn't the variables. Maybe the problem is you. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Jack realized Vincent was testing him, probing for signs that his best contractor had gone soft or worse, had turned. The problem is a client who didn't provide accurate intelligence about the target situation, Jack said. Fix the intelligence, and I'll fix the problem. The intelligence was accurate. Middle-aged woman, isolated location, minimal security. What's changed? Everything, Jack thought. Everything had changed. But he couldn't say that without signing his own death warrant. I'll complete the contract, he said instead. Give me 72. More hours. 48. And Sullivan? Don't make me send someone else to check on your progress. The line went dead. Jack stared at his phone, understanding the implicit threat. Vincent Torino didn't just send people to check on progress. He sent people to eliminate problems, including contractors who'd become unreliable. Jack returned to his room and sat by the window, mind racing. 48 hours to figure out how to fake Elizabeth Harper's death, relocate 4 children, and disappear permanently from Vincent Torino's reach. In his previous life, those would have been manageable problems. Now, with 4 lives depending on him and no infrastructure for creating false identities or safe houses, the logistics seemed overwhelming. The next morning brought a new crisis. That pushed Jack's phone call to the background. Elizabeth had taken a turn for the worse during the night, and Dr. Peterson, the local physician who'd been making house calls, arrived early with grim news. I think it's time to consider hospice care, Dr. Peterson told Jack and Sarah in the kitchen while the younger girls ate breakfast. Your mother's pain is becoming difficult to manage at home. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means moving her to a facility where she can receive around-the-clock medical care. A place where she'd die away from us, Sarah said flatly. Dr. Peterson's expression was kind but firm. A place where she'd be comfortable, and where you girls could visit without carrying the burden of her care. Jack watched Sarah's face crumple slightly. She'd been Elizabeth's primary caregiver for months, learning to administer medications, manage symptoms, and provide comfort during the worst moments. The idea of surrendering that responsibility, even to medical professionals, felt like abandonment. How long would she have? Jack asked. Days, maybe a week. And the cost? Dr. Peterson named a figure that was more than the Harper family's annual income. Even with Jack's resources, it would be expensive, not impossible, but significant. Can I think about it? Sarah asked. Of course. But don't wait too long. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. After Dr. Peterson left, Jack found Sarah sitting on the front porch, staring at the mountains in the distance. Her shoulders were rigid with the effort of not crying. We can't afford hospice, she said without looking at him. Money isn't the issue. Everything is about money. Sarah's voice was bitter. Mom got sick because we couldn't afford regular checkups that might have caught the cancer early. She's dying at home because we can't afford hospital care. And now she's going to die in pain because we can't afford professional help. Jack sat down beside her. What if I told you money really wasn't an issue? I'd ask what you wanted in return. Nothing. Sarah finally looked at him. Nobody has that kind of money and wants nothing in return. Jack realized he was at another crossroads. He could continue the fiction that he was simply a good Samaritan with modest resources, or he could reveal enough truth to convince Sarah that he could solve their immediate financial problems. "I have more money than you might think," he said carefully. "How much more?" "Enough to pay for hospice care. Enough to make sure you and your sisters are taken care of after your mother dies." Sarah studied his face. "What kind of work did you do before you came here?" "The kind that paid very well." "Legal work?" Jack hesitated. "Not always. Dangerous work. Sometimes." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "The dangerous people you're running from, they're connected to this work?" "Yes, and if they found you here, they won't. But if they did?" Jack looked at this 16-year-old girl who'd been forced to make adult decisions for her entire family and decided she deserved an honest answer. "Then I'd make sure they never hurt you or your sisters." "By doing what?" "Whatever was necessary." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're not just someone who fixes problems, are you? You're someone who makes problems disappear." It was uncomfortably close to the truth. I'm trying to be something different now. Because of us. Because of you." That afternoon, while Sarah was at the grocery store and the younger girls were occupied with a movie, Jack received another call. This time the number was local, a Pine Valley area code he didn't recognize. "Jack Sullivan?" The voice was unfamiliar. Male with a slight accent. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's very interested in your current location and activities." Jack felt ice form in his stomach. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm a colleague of Vincent Torino's. I'm in Pine Valley on a fact-finding mission." Jack moved to the window and scanned the road. No unfamiliar vehicles, no signs of surveillance, but that didn't mean anything. Professional watchers knew how to remain invisible. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Question is, are you going to make this easy or difficult? Depends what you're asking for." "Meet me at the Moonlight Diner in 1 hour." "Come alone. We'll discuss your employment situation." The line went dead. Jack stared at his phone, mind racing. Vincent had sent someone to investigate exactly what he'd threatened the night before. The question was whether this was surveillance or elimination. Either way, it meant Jack's time was up. He spent the next hour making preparations. He moved his few belongings to the guest room closet, hiding everything that might identify him as anyone other than a helpful stranger. He wrote a note explaining that he'd been called away on urgent family business, but would return as soon as possible. He left $5,000 in cash in an envelope marked "for whatever you need." Then he sat with Elizabeth, who was awake and alert despite her deteriorating condition. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Temporarily, I hope." "The dangerous people found you." "Maybe I'm going to find out." Elizabeth reached for his hand with effort. "If you don't come back, will you make sure someone knows what you did for us? I want people to know that you chose to help instead of hurt. You don't know what I did before I came here. I know what you did after you got here. That's what matters." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Take care of your girls. Bring yourself back to them. They need you more than they're willing to admit." The Moonlight Diner was nearly empty when Jack arrived. One man sat alone in a corner booth, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in Pine Valley's casual environment. He was young, maybe early 30s, with the kind of build that suggested military training, and the kind of watch that suggested serious money. Jack slid into the booth across from him. "Marcus Webb," the man said, extending his hand. "Vincent's new associate." Jack didn't shake the offered hand. "What do you want?" "Direct. I like that." Webb signaled the waitress for coffee. "Vincent's concerned about your progress on the Harper contract." "My progress is fine." "Is it?" "Because from what I can see, you've been playing house with the target and her children for over a week." So they had been watching. Jack kept his expression neutral. "Deep cover was necessary for this contract. The target is under community observation." Community. Observation, Webb smiled. That's an interesting way to describe shopping for groceries and cooking breakfast. You've been watching the house, among other things. Nice family, tragic situation. Mother dying of cancer, 4 young daughters trying to cope. Really tugs at the heartstrings. The threat was implicit but clear. Webb wasn't just here to question Jack's progress. He was here to remind him what was at stake if he continued to delay. The contract will be completed, Jack said. When? Soon. That's not specific enough. Webb leaned forward. Vincent wants this finished tonight. The client is getting impatient, and impatient clients sometimes hire additional contractors to ensure results. Additional contractors would complicate the situation unnecessarily. Only if the primary contractor is still functional. Vincent's beginning to wonder if you've lost your edge, Sullivan. 15 years of clean completions, and suddenly you're struggling with a dying woman and 4 children? Jack felt anger building in his chest, not at Webb's accusations, but at the casual way he discussed murdering a family that was already suffering. I'll handle it, he said. You'd better. Because if you don't, Vincent's sending me to handle it. And unlike you, I don't have sentimental attachments to the targets. Webb stood and dropped money on the table for his untouched coffee. You have until midnight, Sullivan. After that, this becomes my contract. Jack sat alone in the diner for a long time after Webb left, staring at his reflection in the window and wondering how he'd ever thought this could end any other way. Vincent Torino didn't tolerate delays or excuses. The Harper family was in danger not because of anything they'd done, but because Jack had allowed himself to care about them. Now he had to figure out how to save 4 children from the consequences of his own choices, and he had less than 8 hours to do it. At 11:47 p.m., Emma Harper crept out the back door of her family's house, carrying a gas can and her mother's jewelry box. She moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd spent years exploring every inch of the property, avoiding the spots where dry leaves would crackle underfoot, and staying clear of the sight lines from the road. Jack watched her from the kitchen window, his stomach tight with anxiety. 13 years old, and she was executing a plan that would either save her family or get them all killed. The fact that he was trusting a child to outmaneuver professional assassins said everything about how far his world had shifted from its original axis. She knows what she's doing, Sarah whispered beside him. Emma's been sneaking around this property since she could walk. If anyone can make this work, it's her. Through his earpiece, a communication device he'd rigged using electronics from his surveillance kit, Jack heard Emma's voice. Steady and calm, in position. Give me 2 minutes, then start the show. The show was Jack's part of the plan. At exactly 11:50, he would fire a single gunshot inside the house, while Emma simultaneously ignited a small fire in the barn. The fire would create chaos and draw attention, giving Marcus Webb something dramatic to witness while the family escaped through a tunnel that Emma had discovered years earlier, a relic from the property's bootlegging days during Prohibition. Ready? Jack asked into his microphone. Ready, came Emma's voice. Jack looked around the living room one last time. Elizabeth lay on the couch, barely conscious but alert enough to understand what was happening. Rachel and Lily huddled together near the back door with small backpacks containing their most precious possessions. Sarah stood beside Jack, holding the fake blood packets they'd created using corn syrup and food coloring. If this doesn't work, Jack began. It'll work, Sarah interrupted. It has to. At 11:50 exactly, Jack fired his Glock into the ceiling. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the small house, and he saw Lily flinch despite her preparation. Immediately afterward, he squeezed one of the blood packets against Elizabeth's chest, creating the appearance of a fatal wound. Now, he said into his microphone. Through the kitchen window, Jack saw flames leap to life in the barn. Emma had done her job perfectly. The fire was large enough to be visible from the road, but contained enough that it wouldn't spread to the House or surrounding forest. Everyone to the tunnel, Sarah commanded, and Jack watched the Harper sisters move with the efficiency of a military unit. Rachel and Lily disappeared through a concealed door in the pantry that Jack hadn't even known existed. Sarah followed, helping to support their mother. Jack remained in the living room long enough to stage the scene Webb would discover. He positioned Elizabeth's body to suggest she'd been shot while lying on the couch, scattered some medical equipment to create the appearance of a struggle, and left a blood trail leading toward the back of the house. Then he heard footsteps on the front porch. Jack slipped into the pantry and through the hidden door just as the front door burst open. The tunnel was narrow and low, clearly designed for smaller people in a different era, but it was solid and led exactly where Emma had promised, to a concealed exit in the woods nearly a quarter-mile from the house. The Harper family was waiting for him when he emerged, Elizabeth supported between Sarah and Emma while Rachel and Lily kept watch. In the distance, they could see flames rising from the barn and hear shouting voices as neighbors responded to the fire. "Vehicles this way," Jack said, leading them through the trees toward a spot where he'd hidden a van purchased that afternoon with cash. It wasn't elegant, but it was large enough for 6 people and anonymous enough to avoid attention. As they drove away from Pine Valley, Jack used his phone to call Dr. Peterson. The conversation was brief and professional. Elizabeth Harper had died at home from complications related to her cancer. The body had been removed by the family for cremation. Death certificate paperwork would be filed within 24 hours. Dr. Peterson asked no questions. In small towns, sometimes it was better not to know too much about certain situations. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked from the back seat. "Safe house in Denver," Jack replied. "People I used to work with maintained a facility there for situations like this." Situations like what? When valuable assets needed to disappear permanently. The drive to Denver took 6 hours, with one stop for gas and supplies. Jack paid for everything in cash and kept to back roads where possible. Elizabeth slept most of the way, her breathing labored but steady. The girls took turns holding her hand and whispering encouragement. As the dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, Jack's phone rang. Vincent Torino's number. "Confirmed," Jack said before Vincent could speak. "Contract completed at 20:52 local time. Webb says there was a fire. Accidental. Target was pronounced dead by an attending physician. Body removed for cremation per family wishes. Clean? Completely clean. Local authorities have no questions." There was a pause. "Good work, Sullivan. Deposit will be transferred within 24 hours. Understood. Ready for your next assignment?" Jack looked in the rearview mirror at 4 children who were depending on him to keep them safe. "I need some time off. Personal business to handle." "How much time?" "Few months, maybe longer. That's not like you. I've been doing this for 15 years straight. I need a break." Vincent seemed to accept this explanation. "Fair enough. Contact me when you're ready to get back to work." Jack ended the call and immediately turned off his phone. Vincent Torino would never hear from Jack Sullivan again, but he didn't need to know that yet. The safe house in Denver was a nondescript ranch-style home in a middle-class suburb. From the outside, it looked like any other family residence. Inside, it was equipped with everything needed for long-term concealment: medical facilities, secure communications, and documentation equipment for creating new identities. Jack's contact was a woman named Patricia Wells, a former CIA operative who'd gone into business for herself after retirement. She specialized in making inconvenient people disappear, sometimes permanently, sometimes just relocated with new lives. 6 people, Patricia said, reviewing Jack's requirements. Complete identity replacement. Medical support for a terminal patient. No time limit. Cost? For you? $500,000, all inclusive. Jack didn't hesitate. Done. Interesting family situation, Patricia observed, watching through security cameras as the Harper girls helped their mother into the house. Personal or professional? Personal. Since when do you do personal? Since now, Patricia smiled. Love will make you do crazy things. I should know. I once helped my husband fake his death to escape a cartel contract. How'd that work out? We've been married 37 years under 3 different sets of identities. Over the next 2 weeks, the Harper family underwent a complete transformation. Elizabeth became Margaret Foster, a widow from Oregon receiving experimental cancer treatment. Sarah became Jennifer Foster, her 18-year-old daughter who'd been accepted to nursing school. Emma became Amy Foster, a high school sophomore with a talent for computer programming. Rachel became Rebecca Foster, a middle schooler who loved astronomy. Lily became Lucy Foster, an elementary student who wanted to be a veterinarian. Jack became David Foster, Margaret's brother who'd agreed to help raise his nieces after his sister's eventual death. The backstory was solid, supported by decades of fabricated documents and carefully planted records. Why Foster? Sarah asked as they reviewed their new identities. It means someone who takes care of others, Jack explained. Seemed appropriate. Elizabeth lived for another 6 weeks in the Denver safe house, long enough to see her daughters adjust to their new lives and to know they would be taken care of. She died peacefully on a Tuesday morning in October, surrounded by her girls and the man who'd become their protector. Her funeral was small and private. Margaret Foster was buried in a Denver cemetery under a headstone that read, "Beloved Mother and Sister." She taught us that family isn't always about blood sometimes, it's about choice. After the funeral, Jack sat with the girls in the safe house living room, all of them trying to process their grief while planning their future. What happens now? Jennifer asked. She still looked like Sarah to Jack, but she was learning to respond to her new name. Now you get to choose, Jack said. Patricia has set up college funds for all of you. You can go anywhere you want, study whatever interests you, become whoever you want to be. What about you? Amy asked. What about me? Are you staying with us? Jack had been dreading this question. You don't need me anymore. You're safe now. You have money, new identities, and each other. That's not what I asked, Amy said. I asked if you're staying. Rebecca and Lucy were watching him with the same intensity. 4 pairs of eyes that had learned to trust him completely, waiting to see if he would abandon them now that their mother was gone. Do you want me to stay? He asked. Yes, Lucy said immediately. Definitely, Rebecca added. Obviously, Amy said. Always, Jennifer said quietly. If you want to. Jack looked around at these remarkable young women who'd survived loss and poverty and threats that would have broken most adults. They'd forgiven him for coming to kill their mother. They'd included him in their escape. They'd made him part of their family not because they needed his protection, but because they genuinely wanted him in their lives. Yes, he said. I want to stay. Good, Amy said, grinning. Because I already told Patricia you'd be adopting us officially. You what? David Foster needs to legally adopt his orphan nieces, Jennifer explained. Otherwise there might be questions about custody and guardianship. Jack realized these girls had thought several steps ahead of him. And you're all okay with that? We've been calling you Dad in our heads for weeks, Rebecca said. Making it legal just makes it official. The adoption process took 3 months. During that time, the Foster family settled into a normal life that none of them had experienced in years. Jennifer enrolled in community college and began studying nursing. Amy joined the robotics club at her new high school. Rebecca discovered a love for soccer. Lucy made friends easily and brought home stray animals with heartbreaking regularity. Jack learned to be a father. He attended parent-teacher conferences and soccer games. He helped with homework and mediated sibling disputes. He taught driving lessons and enforced curfews. He discovered that raising 4 teenage girls was more challenging than anything he'd done in his previous career, but also more rewarding. 2 years later, Jack received a letter forwarded through several anonymous mail drops. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a drug smuggling operation that had been uncovered in Montana. Vincent Torino had been arrested along with a dozen associates. The operation had been brought down by an anonymous tip that included detailed financial records and evidence of multiple crimes, including contract killings. Jack smiled as he read the article. Patricia Wells had excellent contacts in law enforcement, and she didn't like people who threatened her client's security. That evening, he sat on the back porch of their Denver home, watching Jennifer help Lucy with science homework while Amy and Rebecca argued about whose turn it was to do dishes. Normal family chaos, normal problems, normal life. Jennifer joined him on the porch after the homework was finished. Regrets? She asked, settling into the chair beside him. About what? Giving up your old life. The money was good, right? Jack thought about that. The money was excellent. But I was dead inside. I just didn't know it until I met your family. And now? Now I know what I was missing. He gestured toward the house where Amy was attempting to teach Rebecca how to code while Lucy narrated the process for her stuffed animals. I was missing this. A house full of teenage girls driving you crazy? A house full of people who love each other. A family worth protecting instead of problems worth eliminating. Jennifer smiled. Mom would be proud of who you became. She'd be proud of who you all became. We became a family, all of us. That's what she wanted. Jack nodded, understanding that Elizabeth Harper had accomplished something remarkable in her final weeks. She'd transformed a contract killer into a father, turned a mission of death into a story of redemption, and proved that sometimes the most important choices are the ones that change everything. 3 years after Elizabeth Harper's death, David Foster stood in the audience at his daughter Jennifer's nursing school graduation, surrounded by Amy, Rebecca, and Lucy, all of them cheering as their sister walked across the stage to receive her diploma. He thought about the contract that had brought him to Pine Valley, and how completely he'd failed to complete it. Elizabeth Harper had died naturally, surrounded by love instead of violence. Her daughters had grown up safe and strong. And Jack Sullivan had discovered that the most important thing he'd ever killed was the man he used to be. The family that had been marked for death had instead become the family that brought him back to life, and that Jack realized was the best contract completion of his entire career. 5 years after Elizabeth Harper's death, David Foster received a letter that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail to the modest suburban home in Denver, where he'd built a life he never thought possible. The return address was from a law firm in Chicago, Brunnan, Walsh and Associates, and the letter was marked urgent regarding estate of Elizabeth Marie Harper. Jackie still thought of himself as Jack Sullivan in quiet moments, stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Elizabeth Harper was supposed to be dead and buried, her past erased along with her family's dangerous connections. The fact that someone was contacting him about her estate meant their carefully constructed new identities might be compromised. "Dad?" Jennifer's voice came from the kitchen where she was preparing for her shift at Denver General Hospital. At 21, she'd graduated nursing school with honors and was working in the pediatric ICU, a choice that surprised no one who knew her history of caring for sick family members. "Everything okay?" she called. "You've been standing in the hallway for 10 minutes. Jack opened the letter and read it twice before the words fully registered. Then he read it a third time, his hands beginning to shake. "Dear Mr. Foster, our firm has been retained to locate the surviving family members of Elizabeth Marie Harper, deceased. We understand that you may have information regarding the whereabouts of Ms. Harper's 4 daughters, Sarah Elizabeth Harper, Emma Rose Harper, Rachel Ann Harper, and Lily Grace Harper. Ms. Harper was the sole beneficiary of a substantial inheritance. that has only recently been processed through probate court. Her death has been confirmed through official channels, making her daughters the rightful heirs to an estate valued at approximately $12.7 million. The inheritance originates from Ms. Harper's late brother, Michael Thomas Harper, who died intestate. In 2019, Mr. Harper was a successful technology entrepreneur who founded several companies in Silicon Valley. As he had no spouse or children, his estate passed to his only living relative, his sister Elizabeth. We have reason to believe that. The Harper daughters are currently living under assumed names for security purposes. We wish to assure you that our investigation has been conducted with complete discretion, and we have no intention of compromising their safety or privacy. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of these assets. Sincerely, Thomas J. Brennan, ESQ. Jack read the letter again, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. Elizabeth had never mentioned a brother. In all their conversations during her final weeks, she'd never suggested that her family had any financial resources beyond what they'd scraped together for her medical care. Either she'd kept this secret deliberately, or she'd genuinely not known about her brother's success and subsequent death. Dad? Jennifer appeared in the hallway, still wearing her nursing scrubs from the night shift. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, Jack said, handing her the letter. Jennifer read it quickly, her expression changing from curiosity to shock to concern. Is this real? It appears to be. $12 million, apparently. Jennifer sank into the hallway chair. They kept her putting on shoes. Mom never said anything about having a brother. Maybe she didn't know he'd become successful, or maybe she knew and chose not to tell us. Why would she do that? Jack thought about Elizabeth Harper's final weeks, how she'd worried constantly about her daughter's futures, how she'd accepted his help because she had no other options. Maybe because she knew if you girls had money, you might not need me to stay. That's ridiculous. We would have wanted you to stay regardless, would you? If your mother had told you that you were about to inherit millions of dollars, would you have trusted a stranger who showed up at your door, claiming to want to help? Jennifer considered this. I don't know, maybe not. Your mother was a smart woman. She understood that money changes everything, including how people see each other. So what do we do now? We tell your sisters, and then we decide as a family. That evening, Jack gathered Amy, Rebecca, and Lucy in the living room for what he privately thought of as the most important family meeting they'd ever had. Amy was now 18 and starting her freshman year at Colorado State University, studying computer engineering. Rebecca, at 15, had become the family's star athlete captain of her high school soccer team and already being recruited by college scouts. Lucy, at 13, remained the family optimist, though she'd channeled her energy into animal rescue work that kept their house full of temporary pets. Before I tell you what this is about, Jack began, I need you to understand that nothing has to change. No matter what we learn tonight, we're still a family. We're still the Fosters. And I'm still your father in every way that matters. You're scaring us, Rebecca said. What's wrong? Jack handed each of them a copy of the lawyer's letter. The room was silent except for the sound of rustling paper as they read. Lucy finished first. We're rich? Apparently, Jack said. How rich? Amy asked, always practical. $12.7 million, according to this. Rebecca whistled softly. That's like a lot of money. It's enough money to change your lives completely, Jack said. College tuitions, graduate school, travel, starting businesses, buying houses, anything you want to do, you'll be able to afford. What's the catch? Amy asked. She'd inherited her mother's suspicion of things that seemed too good to be true. The catch is that to claim this inheritance, you'll have to reveal your true identities. Elizabeth Harper's daughters will have to surface from hiding to claim Elizabeth Harper's brother's estate. Is that dangerous? Lucy asked. Jack thought about Vincent Torino, currently serving a life sentence in federal prison, and the network of criminals that had been dismantled along with him. Probably not. But there's always some risk when you break cover. What do you think we should do? Jennifer asked. I think it's not my decision to make. This money belongs to you four. You're old enough to understand the implications and make your own choices. But what do you want us to do? Rebecca pressed. Jack looked around at these four young women who'd become his daughters in every way except genetics. Jennifer, serious and compassionate, dedicated to healing others. Amy, brilliant and determined, already showing signs of the entrepreneurial spirit that had apparently run in her family. Rebecca, fierce and loyal, protective of everyone she loved. Lucy, optimistic and kind, finding joy even in difficult circumstances. I want you to be happy, he said honestly. If this money makes you happy, take it. If it complicates your lives in ways you don't want, don't take it. But don't make the decision based on what you think I want or need. We could do a lot of good with $12 million, Jennifer said thoughtfully. We could also do a lot of damage, Amy countered. Money changes people. Mom always said that money reveals who people really are, Rebecca added. It doesn't change them, it just shows their true character. Then the question is, Lucy said with the wisdom of a 13-year-old, do we trust our own character? The debate continued for hours. They discussed the practical implications of claiming the inheritance, the potential risks, and the opportunities it would create. They talked about their mother's possible motivations for keeping her brother's existence secret. They considered what Elizabeth Harper would want them to do. Finally, Jennifer spoke for all of them. We need to know more about our uncle, about who he was and why Mom never mentioned him. If we're going to claim his inheritance, we should understand what we're inheriting beyond just money. Jack contacted Thomas Brennan the next morning. The lawyer was professional, but clearly relieved to hear from them. I was beginning to wonder if my investigation had reached a dead end, he admitted during their phone conversation. What can you tell us about Michael Harper? Jack asked. Brilliant man. Started his first tech company when he was 22, sold it for $50 million when he was 28. Used that money to fund 3 more companies, all successful. Never married, had no children, lived very quietly despite his wealth. Did he ever try to contact his sister? There was a pause. That single quote's complicated. According to his personal papers, he hired private investigators to locate Elizabeth several times over the years, but he never made contact. Why not? Based on his journals, he felt responsible for her situation. Apparently, there was some kind of family conflict when they were young adults. Michael left home to pursue his education and career, while Elizabeth stayed to care for their aging parents. By the time Michael achieved success, Elizabeth was married with children and struggling financially. He felt that contacting her would seem like showing off, or that she might think he was offering help out of guilt rather than love. So he just watched from a distance. He monitored her situation through private investigators. When she became ill, he actually paid for some of her medical expenses anonymously, donations made to the hospital in other people's names that covered portions of her treatment costs. Jack felt something twist in his chest. Elizabeth Harper had worried constantly about medical bills and debt, never knowing that her brother was secretly helping to pay for her care. There's something else, Brennan continued. Michael Harper died of a heart attack in his office. His assistant found a letter he'd been writing to Elizabeth, telling her about the inheritance he planned to leave her. He'd finally decided to make contact, but he died before he could send it. Do you have a copy of that letter? I can fax it to you. The letter arrived an hour later, and Jack read it with tears in his eyes. Dear Elizabeth, I know this letter will come as a shock, and I understand if you're angry that I've waited so long to reach out. I've thought about contacting you 1,000 times over the years, but I never knew what to say. How do you apologize for abandoning your family when they needed you most? I left home to build my career, and I built a fortune instead. But what good is money when you don't have anyone to share it with? I've been alone for 20 years. Too proud to admit that I made the wrong choice when I was young. I know you've been sick. I know you're struggling. I know your daughters are growing up without the advantages they deserve. I could have helped years ago, but I was too much of a coward to face you. I'm dying, Elizabeth. Heart problems that money can't fix. But I can leave you something that might make your daughters' lives easier. I've arranged for my entire estate to pass to you, and through you to them. I hope someday you can forgive me for waiting so long to be the brother you deserved. All my love, Michael. Jack shared the letter with the girls that evening. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished reading. He loved her, Lucy whispered. He loved Mom, but he was too scared to tell her. He was like you, Amy said to Jack. Someone who thought he didn't deserve to be part of our family. But, unlike me, he never got the chance to find out he was wrong, Jack replied. Then we have to take the money, Rebecca said firmly. Not for us, but for him, and for Mom. They both wanted us to have it. Are you sure? Jack asked. We're sure, Jennifer said. But we take it as the Fosters, not the Harpers. Our uncle's inheritance comes to Elizabeth Harper's daughters, but Elizabeth Harper's daughters are David Foster's children now. The money doesn't change that. The process of claiming the inheritance took 6 months of legal work, careful negotiations, and security consultations. Patricia Wells helped them navigate the requirements while maintaining their new identity's integrity. In the end, the Harper sisters inherited $12.7 million, but they received it as the Foster daughters, a legal sleight of hand that protected their safety while honoring their uncle's wishes. The money changed their lives, but not in the ways Jack had feared. Jennifer used her portion to fund a scholarship program for nursing students from low-income families. Amy invested hers in technology startups founded by women entrepreneurs. Rebecca established a foundation that provided sports equipment and coaching to underprivileged children. Lucy created an animal rescue sanctuary that became a model for humane education programs. Jack watched his daughters use their inheritance to help others and realized that Elizabeth Harper had been right about money revealing character rather than changing it. These young women had learned compassion and generosity from watching their mother sacrifice everything for their well-being. No amount of money could alter those fundamental values. Do you think Mom knew? Jennifer asked one evening as they reviewed foundation reports in Jack's home office. About Uncle Michael, I mean. Do you think she knew he was watching over us? I think your mother understood love in all its forms, Jack said, including the kind of love that's too ashamed to show itself directly. Like yours was? Jack looked at his oldest daughter, brilliant, compassionate, wise beyond her years, and smiled. Exactly like mine was. And now? Now I know that the best inheritance isn't money, it's family. And family isn't about blood or names or legal documents. It's about choosing to take care of each other, no matter what. 10 years after receiving the letter that changed everything, David Foster sat in the audience at Lucy's college graduation, surrounded by Jennifer, now a nurse practitioner running 3 free clinics, Amy, CEO of a successful tech company that employed over 200 people, and Rebecca, Olympic soccer player turned youth sports advocate. As Lucy walked across the stage to receive her degree in veterinary medicine, Jack thought about the contract that had brought him to Pine Valley all those years ago. He'd been hired to eliminate Elizabeth Harper and leave her daughters orphaned and vulnerable. Instead, he'd become their father and help them build lives of purpose and meaning. The man who'd once believed that problems were solved through violence and elimination had learned that the most important problems, loneliness, grief, fear, hopelessness, could only be solved through connection and love. Jack Sullivan had died in that small house in Pine Valley, Montana. But David Foster had been born there, and he'd spent the last decade learning that redemption wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about using the past to build something better. As his youngest daughter graduated with highest honors, surrounded by family and friends who loved her, Jack realized that he'd finally completed the most important contract of his career, the one that required him to become worthy of the trust that 4 children had placed in a stranger who'd shown up at their door claiming to need help with a broken-down car. Foster family had inherited money from a man who'd spent his life building a fortune but died alone. They'd used that money to build connections with their community, with people in need, with each other. They'd turned their uncle's regret into their own purpose, and they'd proven that the most valuable inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to give. 15 years after, Jack Sullivan first knocked on the door of 1247 Birch Grove Road. David Foster stood in the cemetery where Elizabeth Harper was buried under the name Margaret Foster. It was a crisp October morning, the kind of day when the air smelled of dying leaves and distant snow. He came here every year on the anniversary of her death, not out of obligation, but because this place had become sacred to him, the resting place of the woman who'd taught him that salvation could come through service to others. The headstone was simple granite, weathered now by Colorado winters, but the words remained clear. Margaret Foster, beloved mother and sister. She taught us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Jack placed fresh flowers beside the marker white roses, Elizabeth's favorite, and sat on the small bench his daughters had installed here 5 years earlier. At 62, he moved more slowly than he had during his days as an assassin, but his mind remained sharp and his purpose clear. He was no longer running from anything. For the first time in his adult life, he was running towards something. The future his family was building together. "Hello, Elizabeth," he said quietly, a ritual he'd maintained for 15 years. "I brought pictures." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through recent photos. Jennifer at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her 4th free clinic, this one serving rural communities in Montana, an irony that wasn't lost on either of them. Amy accepted an award for her company's innovative educational software that was being used in schools across the country. Rebecca coached a youth soccer team that had just won the state championship. All of the players from low-income families who couldn't afford traditional training programs. Lucy in her veterinarian's coat, surrounded by a litter of puppies she'd rescued from a puppy mill. "They turned out pretty well," Jack said to the headstone. "You'd be proud of them. Hell, you'd probably be amazed by them. I know I am." The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. Jennifer was walking across the cemetery, carrying a thermos and 2 cups. At 31, she'd inherited her mother's gentle strength, and her father's Jack still thought of himself as their father ability to see through surface problems to underlying needs. "I thought you might want company," she said, settling beside him on the bench. "Don't you have surgeries today? Move them to this afternoon. Some things are more important than schedules." Jennifer poured coffee into both cups, and they sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. This had become their tradition. Jack's annual cemetery visit had gradually evolved into a family gathering, with each of the sisters joining him when their schedules allowed. "I got a call yesterday," Jennifer said eventually, "from someone who wants to write a book about our family." Jack's blood chilled. "What kind of book?" "A journalist named Sarah Martinez. She's been investigating unsolved cases from the early 2000s, and she stumbled across some inconsistencies in Mom's death records. Apparently, Elizabeth Harper's death certificate in Montana shows one cause of death, but Margaret Foster's death certificate in Colorado shows another." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd never heard of anyone named Elizabeth Harper, and that our mother Margaret Foster died of cancer exactly as recorded in her Colorado death certificate." Jack relaxed slightly. "And she believed you?" "She's suspicious, but she doesn't have any proof. The problem is, she's persistent. She's been calling Amy and Rebecca too, asking questions about our family history. What kind of questions? About where we lived before Colorado, about how we met you, about why a single man in his 40s suddenly adopted 4 orphan sisters. Jack considered this. Over the years, he'd known this moment might come. Their new identities had been expertly crafted, but no false identity was perfect. Eventually, someone with enough curiosity and investigative skills might notice discrepancies that couldn't be explained away. "Do you think she knows the truth?" he asked. "I think she suspects there's more to our story than we're telling. But I don't think she knows what that story actually is. What do you want to do about it?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment, staring at her mother's headstone. "I want to tell her." "Jennifer, not everything. Not about your past or the contract or why we had to disappear. But I want to tell her about Mom. About what she did for us and what you did for us, and how sometimes families are created in the most unexpected ways." Jack studied his daughter's face. "Why?" "Because Mom's story deserves to be told. Not the whole truth, that would put us all in danger, but the parts that matter. The parts about love and sacrifice and choosing to save people instead of hurting them." "And you think this journalist would tell that story responsibly?" "I think she's looking for the truth. And the truth is that our family exists because people made impossible choices for love. That's a story worth telling." Before Jack could respond, more footsteps approached. Amy and Rebecca were walking across the cemetery together, deep in conversation. Behind them came Lucy, who'd driven up from her veterinary practice in Colorado Springs. "Family meeting in a graveyard," Amy observed as she reached the bench. "That's either very dramatic or very us." "Probably both," Rebecca said, settling on the grass near the headstone. At 25, she'd retired from professional soccer after a knee injury. But she'd channeled her competitive spirit into her foundation work with the same intensity she'd once brought to athletic training. Lucy distributed sandwiches she'd brought from the deli near her clinic. "So what are we discussing?" Jennifer said it was important. "A journalist is asking questions about our family history," Jack explained. "What kind of questions?" Amy asked, immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. Jennifer outlined the situation while the others listened. When she finished, Lucy was the first to speak. "So basically, someone's figured out that we're not who we claim to be, but they don't know who we actually are." "That's an accurate summary," Jack said. "And Jennifer wants to tell them a version of the truth that protects the dangerous parts, but shares the meaningful parts," Rebecca added. "Also accurate." Amy frowned. "What's the worst-case scenario if we tell this story?" Jack thought about that. "Government attention, maybe. Social services questions about how I came to adopt you. Media interest in our finances and foundation work. What's the worst-case scenario if we don't tell this story, and she keeps investigating? She uncovers the whole truth. The real identities, the circumstances of your mother's death, possibly even my background. So we're choosing between controlled disclosure and uncontrolled discovery," Amy said. "Essentially, yes." Rebecca picked at the grass beside her mother's grave. "What would Mom want us to do?" It was the question that always mattered most in their family decisions. What would Elizabeth Harper, who'd faced terminal cancer while raising 4 children alone, want her daughters to do when confronted with this choice? "She'd want us to protect each other," Lucy said. "That was always her first priority. But she'd also want the truth to mean something," Jennifer added. "She spent her whole life protecting us and sacrificing for us. If our story could help other families or inspire other people to make better choices, she'd want that truth to be shared." Jack looked around at these 4 remarkable women who'd become his daughters, his purpose, his redemption. They were discussing whether to risk everything they'd built for the possibility of helping strangers they'd never meet. It was exactly The kind of impossible choice their mother had made when she'd welcomed a stranger into her home during her final weeks. "There's something I need to tell you first," he said. "Before you make this decision." The sisters exchanged glances. In 15 years of family meetings, Jack had never prefaced anything with those words. "I've been thinking about retirement," he continued. "From everything, the business consulting, the security work, all of it. I want to step back and let you four be the leaders you've become." "Dad, you're 62, not 92, Amy said. "You don't need to retire." "I don't need to, but I want to. I've spent the last 15 years learning how to be your father. Now I want to spend the next 15 years watching you change the world." "What does that have to do with the journalist?" Rebecca asked. "It means that if we tell this story, and it brings attention or complications, I'm ready to handle whatever consequences come. You four have built lives and careers and relationships that matter. You don't need my protection anymore." "We'll always need your protection," Lucy said fiercely. "Not because we can't protect ourselves, but because that's what families do for each other." Jack felt tears threaten a response that still surprised him after all these years of emotional growth. "Then the question is, are we brave enough to trust that our story is worth the risk?" Jennifer stood and walked to her mother's headstone, placing her hand on the granite surface. "Mom trusted a stranger who knocked on our door claiming to need help. She had no way of knowing whether you were dangerous or safe, but she chose to trust you anyway. And that choice saved all of us," Amy added. "So maybe now it's our turn to take a leap of faith," Rebecca said. "To trust that sharing our story might save someone else." Lucy nodded. "Mom always said that the most important things in life require the most courage." Jack looked at his daughters, brilliant, compassionate, determined women who'd inherited their mother's capacity for impossible love, and their adoptive father's hard-won wisdom about the difference between destruction and protection. "Then we tell the story," he said. The meeting with Sarah Martinez took place 3 weeks later in a conference room at Jennifer's largest clinic. Jack had insisted on neutral ground where they could control the environment and to end the conversation quickly if needed. Martinez was younger than Jack had expected, maybe 35. With the kind of focused intensity that suggested someone who'd built her career on uncovering stories other people wanted buried. She'd brought a digital recorder and a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she began. "I know this situation must be uncomfortable. We're here because we believe our story might help other families facing similar circumstances," Jennifer said. "But we need your assurance that you'll respect our privacy and our safety." "You have it. What I'm interested in is the human story, how families survive impossible circumstances, how strangers become family, how love creates healing." For the next 2 hours, the Foster family told their story. Not the whole truth, nothing about Jack's background as an assassin, nothing about the contract on Elizabeth's life, nothing about the criminal organization that had forced them into hiding. But they told the truth about everything that mattered: a dying mother's courage, 4 children's resilience, a stranger's decision to help instead of hurt, and a family's choice to rebuild their lives around service to others. Martinez listened, without judgment, asking clarifying questions, but never pushing for details they weren't willing to share. When they finished, she was quiet for several minutes. "This is an extraordinary story," she said finally. "And I understand why you've been protective of it. But I have to ask, there's more, isn't there? Some reason why you needed to disappear completely, why you couldn't just be the Harper family receiving help from a good Samaritan." Jack and his daughters exchanged glances. They'd agreed on how to handle this question. "There are parts of our story that involve other people's privacy and safety," Jack said. "People who helped us when we needed help, but who can't be part of any public narrative. People who might be hurt if their involvement became known. People who've already been hurt enough." Martinez nodded slowly. "I can work with that." The story you've told me is powerful enough without whatever details you're protecting. 6 months. Later, Sarah Martinez's article appeared in The Atlantic under the title "The Family That Chose Each Other." It told the story of Elizabeth Harper's battle with cancer, her daughter's courage in caring for her, and David Foster's decision to help a family of strangers. It described the charitable work the sisters had built with their inheritance and the way they'd turned personal tragedy into public service. The article carefully avoided any details that might compromise their safety or reveal their previous identities. It focused instead on the themes that had defined their journey: the power of chosen family, the importance of service to others, and the possibility of redemption through love. The response was overwhelming. The Foster Family's foundations received thousands of donations from readers inspired by their story. Jennifer's clinics were flooded with volunteers. Amy's company gained new clients who wanted to support educational initiatives. Rebecca's youth sports programs expanded to 12 new cities. Lucy's animal rescue received enough funding to triple its capacity. More importantly, they received letters from families facing similar crises, single parents struggling with terminal illnesses, children caring for sick relatives, strangers who'd found each other in difficult circumstances and wondered if they could build lasting connections. "Mom would have loved this," Lucy said one evening as they sat around Jack's kitchen table, reading letters from people their story had helped. "She did love this," Jack corrected. "She loved it before it happened. Every choice she made, every risk she took, every moment she chose trust over fear, she was building toward this." Jennifer looked up from a letter she was reading. "Do you ever regret it, giving up your old life for us?" Jack thought about the man he'd been 15 years ago, isolated, emotionally numb, defining himself entirely through his capacity for violence. Then he looked around the table at these 4 women who'd taught him that strength could be gentle, that power could be used to heal instead of hurt, that the most important victories were the ones that saved souls instead of claiming them. "I don't regret anything," he said, "because I didn't give up my old life for you. You gave me a new life. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Rebecca asked. "The difference is that sacrifice implies loss. But I didn't lose anything when I chose your family. I gained everything," Amy smiled, "including 4 daughters who will never let you retire completely. Including 4 daughters who've become the kind of people their mother always knew they could be." As the evening wound down and his daughters prepared to return to their own homes and responsibilities, Jack reflected on the strange mathematics of redemption. He'd been hired to eliminate 1 life and had instead helped create 4 new ones. He'd been paid to bring death and had instead learned to nurture life. The contract that had brought him to Pine Valley, Montana, had been completed after all, just not in the way anyone had expected. Elizabeth Harper had died naturally, surrounded by love. Her daughters had survived and thrived. And Jack Sullivan had discovered that the most important thing he could kill was the man he used to be. 15 years later, David Foster understood that some contracts could only be fulfilled through love, and that the best assassinations were the ones that destroyed evil to make room for good. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first snow of another Colorado winter. Inside, a family that had been born from tragedy and built through choice was planning ways to help others find their own paths from darkness to light. The man who'd once believed that problems were solved through elimination had learned that the most important problems, loneliness, despair, hopelessness, cruelty, could only be solved through connection, compassion, and the radical choice to become someone worthy of another person's trust. Elizabeth Harper's greatest legacy wasn't the inheritance her brother had left, or the charitable foundations her daughters had built, or even the lives they'd saved through their work. Her greatest legacy was the transformation of a killer into a father, and the proof that love really could conquer death, not by preventing it, but by making sure that the love someone shared while alive continued to grow and spread long after they were gone. That, Jack realized as he watched snow fall outside. His window was the kind of contract worth spending a lifetime fulfilling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.